Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Starfinder What Is. Today, we're going to be talking about how thrown weapons, aka how do grenades work in Starfinder. Also, I did realize something really cool while researching grenades for this video. I'm not saying it's game-changing, but stick around for the end of the video and you can be the judge of that. Rules for thrown weapons can be found on page 182, 183, 189, 218, 245, and 402 of the Starfinder Cool Rulebook. It's kind of unfortunate that all the rules aren't clustered together, but the good folks at Paizo are pretty good at telling you where to look next, so it's really not that bad. What a thrown weapon is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically anything that you want to throw at someone that's going to mess up their day. Typically, this applies to things like knives, shurikens, and grenades. But like Verified Cool Guy at the Maple Table pointed out in his video, it could also apply to really anything else that you want to throw, like a chair, or maybe even a dwarf if you're desperate enough.
Toss me. What? I cannot jump the distance, you'll have to toss me!
There are two types of thrown weapons. The first type has a single target. This would be something like a knife, an axe, or a chair. The second type of thrown weapon is anything that targets an area. This would usually be some sort of a grenade, or, if you really don't mind having a prosthetic limb, you could always try throwing a landmine like a frisbee. To hit something with a single target thrown attack, you would use your dice roll, plus your base attack bonus, plus your strength modifier, along with any range penalties, versus their KAC or EAC. As a reminder, you can throw farther than the weapon's given range, but you will take a -2 penalty to hit for every range increment you are trying to throw beyond. To learn more about how range works, go watch our video on how range combat works. And to calculate damage, you would add your strength modifier to whatever you rolled on your damage die. To hit something with a grenade, you still use the same modifiers to hit as you would with a single target thrown weapon. However, unlike a single target weapon, the DC to hit your target area is always 5. This is because you're not necessarily attacking them, but just the area that it's in. It's like they say, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. And in this scenario, you do really only need to be close. If the area you are in is hit with the grenade, you can make a reflex saving throw. The DC is 10, plus half the grenade's item level, plus the thrower's dex modifier. The DC is also lowered by any penalties that the user takes due to range. For example, if the DC would typically be 15, but they threw it at one range increment farther, the DC would actually be 13. If the grenade has any special effects in the special section, a creature that makes a save would still take half the damage, but would not be affected by the grenade's special effects. That covers what happens if you hit your target, but just because you miss doesn't mean that it just disappears. The throwing knife or grenade will still go somewhere, just not where you want it.
Yeah. War God, more like poor God.
To find where it would land, roll 1d8 to find where the projectile will land in relation to you and the target. Then roll a d4 to see how far off the projectile is. For example, let's say that you throw a knife at a goblin and you miss. You roll an 8 on the d8 and a 2 on the d4. That means that the knife will fall here. The same thing applies to grenades, except for the fact that you are targeting a block of squares instead of just one, and potentially run the risk of hitting an ally, or if you really mess up, the possibility of hitting yourself. Going back to our goblin example, it would look like this. That covers the basics of hitting and missing with thrown weapons, but there are still a few more things you need to know before you start yeeting knives and bombs. Thanks to that big nerd Isaac Newton, we know that gravity is a thing, and I think it's actually kind of cool that Paizo made rules for how gravity affects thrown weapons. You know what? Gold star to whoever thought of that. In zero gravity, a thrown weapon's range increment is 10 times what it would normally be. So if a grenade originally had a range of 20 feet, you can now throw it 200 feet, and the projectile no longer has a maximum range. It'll just get more and more inaccurate, but if it's a grenade, it'd probably just explode before that becomes a real issue. I only have one gripe with this. So in my mind, the fact that a grenade only has an AC of 5 is because you're more aiming at the ground that they are standing on instead of them. But if they're floating in the air, to me that kind of negates it. Personally, I would have to have the grenade hit the target's KAC, but that's just me. In low gravity, the range for a thrown weapon is tripled. For standard gravity rules, just rewatch the video. It's all there, I promise. In high gravity, the range of your thrown weapon is cut in half, unless you're somehow already acclimated to high gravity. The book doesn't have any specific rules for how thrown weapons are affected by extreme gravity. Based on the fact that you constantly take damage while in extreme gravity, they probably assume that throwing explosives would be pretty low on your priority list. However, while being crushed to death, if you still want to throw a grenade at someone, I would say that the range would be reduced to a fifth of what it would normally be, because extreme gravity is 5 times higher than standard gravity. Speaking of range, There are a few things you can do to boost the range of your grenades. One way is through the use of grenade launchers, which are a heavy weapon. You could use a crossbolter, which is a long arm, which is basically a crossbow, but it's used for throwing grenades really far. Or you can even use a bomb arrow, which is basically a bow and arrow, but you just remove the arrowhead and you put a grenade on the end of it. Another cool thing about grenades is that by using a detonator, you can safely detonate grenades from a distance of up to 500 feet. The activation of a detonator could be something as quick as the press of a button, which is a free action. It could also be set off with a 4-digit passcode, which is a move action. Or, if you still want to blow something up, but you really want to make sure that you're the one to do it, you can set the detonator to go off after completing a more complex task as a full action. This could be something like scanning your thumb, saying a short phrase, or maybe even moving the detonator in a certain way. You can also use a detonator as part of an engineering skill check to blow up a stationary item, like a door or a parked vehicle. If you do this, the explosion ignores half of the object's hardness. And last but not least, I realized some very interesting things about using detonators. The first thing is that the book never says how many grenades can be attached to a detonator, which on its own is interesting because it means that you can always just throw more grenades at the door that you are trying to breach. The second thing I realized is that since activating the detonator is a free action with a button press, and can still be thrown and activated in the same turn, it basically becomes what I like to call Big Grenade. To use Big Grenade, you'd make a single thrown attack and anyone in the explosion would make one reflex saving throw for reducing damage, just like a regular grenade. And then you would use the appropriate damage die for each grenade used to make Big Grenade. However, if you want to mix grenades that have different effects, like a crowd grenade and a flash grenade, the saving throw would be based off the lowest level grenade in the explosive package. I feel like this is balanced because each detonator can only be hooked up to one explosive package at a time, and it takes 1 minute to set up each explosive. So unless you plan on having multiple detonators, which cost 150 credits apiece, along with all of your money on grenades, I feel like this balances out. Well everyone, that's going to wrap up this episode of What Is Grenades. In the comments down below, tell me how you would use grenades in your game, and if you learned anything new. Or if you want to just yell at me for being such a fat, dumb piece of shit, I'm good with that too. Comments help with the algorithm, so give me your hate, I guess. Also, if you've got to this point in the video, you're probably one of the people who actually does care about the channel, so good on you. I like that. And just to address the elephant in the room, yeah, I know videos have come out a lot slower. I've been dealing with a lot of sad boy hours after Lance being dead and just general life and shenanigans during these trying times. But also, I did just put in an offer on a house and we're moving in soon, so videos are going to be a little bit slower, even more so, just because I've got to move all my crap and then get set up and then deal with all my utilities, which is super fun and not time consuming. So I'll still make videos. It just, please be patient. It's going to be a second. Stay safe, y'all.